I lost everything after Dad died. Then one day I gave half a sandwich to a homeless man in Lansing. He looked at me and said, "Your father told me you'd come." Then he handed me an old rusted key. I'm Ethan Caldwell, 38. Once a lead engineer, now a broke single dad. That key led me to my parents' hidden fortune and to a family betrayal buried for years. It was one of those bitter Michigan afternoons in early April when the wind made it feel colder than it actually was. I sat alone on a cracked wooden bench in Washington Park across from the old courthouse in downtown Lansing. My fingers were numb, but I didn't mind. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich rested on my lap, half-eaten and slightly smashed. It was cheap, but it filled me up, and that was all I cared about lately. Losing my job at Detroit Motors nearly a year ago had flipped my life upside down. I went from working 60-hour weeks in a factory I loved to scraping by, doing odd jobs, and dipping into savings I had once set aside for my daughter's college. Erin was 10 now and still believed her dad could fix anything. I wasn't so sure anymore. As I took another bite, I saw him. An old man pushing a shopping cart piled high with plastic bags and a stained blanket. He walked slowly, his steps uneven like every joint in his body argued with him. His beard was snow-white, wild, and tangled. His coat had more patches than fabric. I'd seen him around before, usually camped out near the train station. He had the look of someone who had lived through more winters than he cared to count. He paused when he saw me, eyes flicking toward my sandwich. I looked down at it, then back at him. Without thinking, I tore off the uneaten half and held it out. He hesitated, then took it gently, his hand trembling as if unsure whether I might snatch it back. He sat on the other end of the bench, quietly chewing. For a while, we didn't say anything. The wind whistled through the bare branches above us. "That's real decent of you, son," he said, finally, his voice rough like gravel. "Not many folks would give up their lunch." "Wasn't much of a lunch," I said, "but it's something." He nodded, looking off into the distance. "Used to be people knew each other in this town. Your dad ever talk about that?" I turned to him, startled. "My dad? You knew George Caldwell?" The man smiled, showing a row of crooked teeth. "Knew him, hell. I worked with him back in the 70s. Caldwell Auto Garage. Your dad ran the best shop in town. Honest man, real decent. He used to let me crash in the back when things got bad." I blinked. That shop had closed decades ago. My father never talked much about the past. I only knew it used to be a family business. He sold it before I was born. You're Walter. He chuckled softly. "Well, I'll be, so you do remember, or at least heard of me." He reached into his coat, rummaging through a pocket sewn in with dental floss, then pulled out something small and wrapped in tissue. His hands shook as he passed it to me. The tissue was yellowed and worn. Inside was an old brass key, scratched and dulled with age. "Your father gave me this years ago," Walter said, his voice suddenly serious. "Told me to hold on to it. Said one day his boy might come looking. He said if the kid offers you kindness without knowing who you are, that's when he'll be ready." I stared at the key in my palm. It was heavy, solid. It didn't look like much, just a key. But the weight of it sank deep into my chest. "What is this supposed to open?" He looked at me with eyes that seemed clearer than a moment ago. "I don't know, Ethan, but your father said it mattered. Said there were things he couldn't say, things he couldn't trust anyone else with. Only you. Said it had to be you." I was quiet for a long time. The key pressed against my skin like it had been waiting. "Where did he give this to you when?" "Back when the shop closed. He didn't tell me why. Just looked me dead in the eye and said, 'Walter, you're the only one I trust to hold this. You give it to my son when he's old enough to see the truth for himself.'" I nodded slowly. "Thank you. I don't know what this is yet. but thank you." Walter stood up, brushing crumbs from his coat. "Don't thank me. Just make sure you do right by your old man. Some things are bigger than money, bigger than pride." He gave you a key. "Find the door." With that, he pushed his cart forward and disappeared down the sidewalk, his figure swallowed by the shadows of buildings. I sat there staring at the key in my hand, wondering what the hell my father had left behind that he couldn't tell me when he was alive, and why he thought I was finally ready now. I drove home with the key sitting in my jacket pocket like it had weight far greater than metal. The roads through downtown Lansing were quiet that evening, gray buildings casting long shadows across empty streets. The city always felt a little hollow after 5 o'clock, like everyone disappeared behind brick walls and drawn curtains. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, the same beige 3-story building I had moved into after selling the house 2 years ago. Erin was on the couch when I came in, her legs tucked beneath her as she read one of those fantasy novels she loved. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, Daddy, you're late. Dinner's cold. Sorry, Peanut." I got caught up. "Sandwich okay?" She nodded and returned to her book. I placed my jacket on the hook by the door, careful with the key inside. I stood for a moment in the small kitchen, staring at the worn-out counter. The flickering light above the stove, the fridge humming like an old song you couldn't turn off. I reached into the pocket and pulled out the key again, laid it on the table like it might suddenly speak to me. My father's face came to mind. George Caldwell, a man of few words and fewer smiles. He had rough hands and a quiet way of carrying the world on his shoulders. I remembered him best in oil-stained overalls, hunched over a carburetor in the back of his garage, music playing low from a dusty radio. He wasn't warm exactly, but he was solid, dependable. He died 6 years ago, the result of a car crash on I-96. They said it was a deer that he swerved and hit a tree. I never saw the body. The funeral had been quiet. Calvin handled most of the arrangements. I was still living in Chicago at the time, trying to keep a job I already hated. Erin was barely 4. Everything back then felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I sat down and stared at the key again. My fingers curled around it. The brass was cold but familiar somehow, like it had been meant for me all along. After Dad passed, Calvin wasted no time stepping in. He'd always been more assertive, the kind of guy who smiled while taking things apart. He wasn't a bad person, not exactly. Just the type who knew how to get what he wanted without asking. He claimed Dad left no will, said everything had to go to pay off debts. The garage, the tools, even the land behind it. It was all sold within months. I didn't fight him. Back then I was too tired, too far away, too wrapped up in my own problems to question anything. But something had always felt off. Mom passed away a year before Dad. Cancer, Lena Caldwell. She was the one who held everything together after her dad changed. He stopped calling. His voice grew thinner, and then he was gone. There was a memory that surfaced then, clear as day. I was 15, sitting in the driveway after school, angry about something I couldn't remember now. My dad had come out wiping grease from his hands. He stood there a long time before speaking. "You think I'm hard on you, Ethan. You think I don't say much. But one day you'll see why. Some things a man can't explain until the time is right." I hadn't understood him then. Maybe I still didn't. But the key, Walter, the way my father planned something so long ago, it all pointed to something he couldn't say out loud. Something he didn't trust anyone else with. That same week after the funeral, I'd asked Calvin if Dad had kept anything from the old garage. He'd shrugged, said the place was empty. He'd taken over the cleanup himself. When I pushed, he'd gotten defensive. "George didn't have much left, Ethan. Let it go. Let it go." That was Calvin's answer to everything inconvenient. I got up, went into the small bedroom where I kept a shoebox of old photos and letters. Inside were a few birthday cards from Dad, yellowing at the edges, most signed with just his name. No messages, no notes. But one letter from Mom had stuck with me. It was dated 2 years before she died. In it she wrote, "I know you don't always understand your father. I didn't either for a long time. But he's a man who believes in signs and timing. He keeps things close until he believes someone is ready. I hope one day you'll understand why he stayed silent about certain things." I held the letter in one hand and the key in the other. A cold knot twisted in my stomach. Calvin had always been involved more than I was, more connected to the garage and my father's affairs, but he was also impatient, controlling. If there was something Dad didn't want him to find, he would have hidden it well. I thought of Walter again, of the quiet certainty in his voice when he said Dad told him to wait until I showed kindness. My father had trusted a homeless man more than his own blood. Or maybe that was the point. Maybe Walter had proven something the rest of us hadn't. Ethan Aaron's voice broke through my thoughts. "Yeah, baby. You look sad. Are you okay?" I turned to her, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about Grandpa. Remember him?" She nodded. "He smelled like coffee and metal." That made me laugh. "Yeah, he did. And maybe a little bit like trouble." She went back to her book, satisfied. I sat there in the dim light, the room humming with silence. Whatever this key opened, it wasn't just a lock. It was a door to everything my father hadn't said. A door Calvin had never wanted me to find. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I had to go back to the place I'd been avoiding for years. The old garage, or what was left of it. Tomorrow I'd start looking. Rain came early that morning, soft and cold like a warning. I left Aaron at school and drove across town with the key in my coat pocket and a familiar pressure behind my ribs. The drive to the old shop didn't take long. Lansing wasn't a big place, but memories made it feel like it stretched for miles. Caldwell Auto sat on the edge of a strip of warehouses off Holt Road behind a chain-link fence rusted at the base. The sign was still there, faded letters barely legible against the flaking red paint. The building itself had been gutted and repurposed years ago after Dad died, turned into some storage rental business that Calvin now managed. Or leased out, I wasn't sure which, and I didn't care. What mattered was that the bones were still the same, and so was the basement. I parked a block away and walked through the side alley, pulling up the hood of my jacket. A delivery truck passed by, tires spraying puddles onto the curb. I waited until it disappeared, then slipped through a tear in the fence. My boots sank into mud as I circled the back where a side door used to be. It had a new lock. I crouched and pressed my shoulder into it. It gave with a groan that echoed louder than I expected. Inside, the air smelled like damp concrete and stale oil. The main floor was stacked with cardboard boxes, empty shelves, dust coating everything like snow. But I didn't waste time. I moved to the far wall near the old tool bench. That wall had once hidden the stairs to the basement. Years ago, Dad had boarded it up, said the foundation down there was too unstable, but I knew better. He just didn't want anyone else going down there. The boards came off easier than I expected. Nails, old and brittle wood, warped and soft from years of Lansing winters. I slipped inside and descended the narrow stairs, each one groaning under my weight. The basement was dark but not unfamiliar. My phone flashlight barely cut through the shadows, but I remembered the layout. Brick walls, oil drums, a rusted-out sink. Then I saw it. In the far corner behind a stack of old tires and paint cans was a narrow metal door I had never noticed before. Faded green edges, corroded. It looked more like a maintenance hatch than anything serious. But it was padlocked, and the padlock was thick. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. My hands were shaking more from nerves than cold. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, but then gave with a loud click. The padlock dropped into my palm. I hesitated a moment, then pulled the door open. Behind it was a small crawl space, barely 5 feet wide. I ducked inside and found myself facing a brick wall. But something was off. The mortar in the center looked different, newer, sloppy, like someone had patched over something in a hurry. I tapped along the bricks until one gave slightly. I dug at it with a screwdriver from the floor, pried it loose, then another. My breath came faster as the gap widened. There behind the false wall was a metal box, a safe, heavy, square, covered in dust and grease. The kind you'd see in old movies, the kind nobody used anymore. I brushed it off and found a dial. No keypad, no digital lock, just an old-fashioned combination. I stepped back, heart racing. This was it. This was what my father had hidden, what Walter had protected, what Calvin had never found. But I had no combination, no idea where to start. I ran my fingers over the safe, looking for scratches, tape, anything. Nothing. Just cold steel. Still it was real, tangible, proof that my father had left something behind. Something that required trust and patience to reach. And now I was standing in front of it, one piece away from unlocking a story that had waited years to be told. A door creaked upstairs. I froze. Footsteps. I killed the flashlight and crouched low, barely breathing. Voices followed, muffled but getting closer. Someone else was here, and I wasn't supposed to be. I stayed still, hidden in the shadows, waiting for them to leave. The walls seemed to press in tighter around me. My heart thudded in my ears. Whoever it was didn't come down the stairs. After a few tense minutes, the door slammed shut again. Silence returned. I waited longer just in case. When I finally crept out, the building was empty again. I didn't look back as I locked the side door behind me. The key was back in my pocket, but my mind was with the safe. I needed the combination. And I had a feeling I knew where to find it, or rather who to ask. Walter wasn't hard to find. I knew where he usually stayed, near the train station downtown, beneath the overpass where the city forgot to look. When I pulled up, he was sitting on an old milk crate beside a shopping cart full of bottles and blankets, sipping coffee from a cracked thermos. He saw me before I spoke. "You found it, didn't you?" "Yeah, I found the safe, but I need the combination." He nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting for me to ask. He pulled a scrap of paper from his coat and handed it over without a word. Faded ink in my father's handwriting. 3 numbers. I stared at it. "Why didn't you give this to me with the key?" "Because it wasn't time," Walter said. "You needed to find it first." That was the point. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't. I just thanked him and left. Back at the garage, I moved fast. I slipped in the same way down into the crawlspace, flashlight clenched in my teeth. The safe was just as I left it, cold, silent, waiting. I turned the dial, 34-17-59. There was a soft click. My hands trembled as I swung the heavy door open. Inside was a small mountain of envelopes and folders, yellowed at the corners. Beneath them, stacks of cash. Hundreds, maybe thousands, bundled tight, labeled by year. Receipts, old banknotes, and beneath all of it, a single envelope with my name on it, Ethan, written in my father's handwriting. I sat on the floor and opened it with shaking fingers. My son. If you're reading this, it means you found what I couldn't give you while I was alive. I've always been a man of silence, not because I didn't care, but because words often fail when truth is heavy. I didn't trust Calvin. I wish I could say otherwise. He's your cousin, your blood, but blood isn't always enough. After your mother passed, things shifted. Calvin began showing too much interest in the garage, in the books, in what I had saved. I saw the way he maneuvered, always charming, always helpful, but never without an angle. I started moving things, hiding them, making sure if anything happened to me, he wouldn't get it all. I chose Walter for a reason. He once saved my life when I was young and stupid and drunk in a snowstorm. That man has more honor than most of the suits I've met in courtrooms. I trusted him with the key because I knew he would wait for the right time. And I knew he'd know when you were ready. You were never the son who wanted money. You were the one who wanted truth, who asked questions, who walked away from comfort when your conscience told you to. That's why this is for you. There's just over $750,000 in this safe. Not all of it clean, not all of it easy to explain, but it's yours. Not because you need it, but because you earned it. You earned it the day you gave a piece of your lunch to a man everyone else ignored. Don't let Calvin take it from you. Don't let him lie again. This isn't about revenge. It's about setting things right. Use it wisely. Use it honestly. And remember your mother. She always believed you'd come back to the truth. Love, Dad. I folded the letter and sat still for a long time. The money didn't shock me. Not really. I knew Dad had done work under the table. Repairs for cash. Deals off the books. It was the letter that hit hardest. That he had seen what I couldn't. That he had protected me from the shadows. That he had believed in me more than I believed in myself. I ran my fingers along the edges of the cash bundles. My name, written in ink on the envelope, still rested in my lap. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a message. A quiet declaration that integrity still mattered even in a family as fractured as ours. I closed the safe, relocked it, and stood. Outside rain had started again. The clouds hung low over Lansing, heavy and slow. I climbed the stairs and shut the basement behind me. My phone buzzed. A message from Calvin. Hope you're not poking around the old place. Place is leased. You'd be trespassing. I stared at the screen and didn't reply. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of him. I knew the truth now, and I knew what had to come next. The next morning I shaved, put on the cleanest shirt I owned, and drove to the north side of town, where Calvin's real estate office sat nestled between a nail salon and a tax prep service in a newer strip mall. His company name, Caldwell Property Group, was etched in frosted glass across the double doors. It looked professional, polished, successful, just like him. The receptionist was a woman in her 50s with silver hair in a tight bun and nails too perfect to be real. I gave her my name, told her I was hoping to catch Calvin for a quick word. She looked me over like she was measuring my worth, then picked up the phone. "He'll be with you in a moment," she said. The waiting area was all sleek leather and magazines no one read. I didn't sit. I kept my hands in my pockets, fingers grazing the folded note from my father like it might keep me steady. Calvin appeared 5 minutes later, dressed in a crisp navy blazer, all smiddles and sharpness. "Ethan, well. Thought you were done with Lansing." I smiled back, steady. I was. But some things don't stay buried forever. He led me to his office, gestured toward a chair across from a glass desk that had nothing on it but a laptop and a gold pen. The walls were lined with photos of commercial buildings and handshakes. "So what's this about?" he asked, folding his hands in front of him. I took a breath. "Just came by to talk. Thought maybe we could revisit the garage property. Caldwell Auto still means something to me. Thought maybe it was time to restore it, as family." Calvin leaned back, smirking. "You want back in on the property? After what, 6 years, Ethan, come on. I shrugged casual. I was there the other day, just walked by, brought back memories. That basement always gave me the creeps, you know. Funny how it's still locked up after all this time. His eyes flicked to mine just for a second. Not long, but enough. Then he smiled again too wide. There's nothing down there but mold and rats. City flagged it for poor drainage years ago. I'm surprised it hasn't collapsed. I nodded slow. Maybe. Or maybe there's something else. You'd know better than me. You were the one handling all the cleanup after Dad passed. His jaw tightened. I saw it even as he tried to cover it with a laugh. Look, I know you had a rough patch losing your job raising Aaron alone. Maybe nostalgia's hitting harder than usual. But that property is under lease. And even if it weren't, it's not your call anymore. You walked away, remember? That's what you told everyone. That Dad left nothing. That it was all sold to cover debts. It was. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. But what if I found something? Something Dad meant for me to find. Something you never knew about. His smile vanished. For the first time, Calvin looked like the mask had slipped. What are you talking about? Let's not pretend, Cal. You and I both know Dad wasn't the kind of man to leave loose ends. He knew who you were. He just didn't say it out loud. But he planned for it. He left things behind. Calvin stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to me. When he turned, his face was cold. I don't know what you think you found, but if you make noise about anything you're not supposed to have, I'll bury you. Legally, financially, you're trespassing. You're admitting to accessing private property. You think a letter from George gives you rights, you want to drag this into court, fine. But I'll make sure you walk out with nothing but court fees and a few bruises to your name. I stood too calm. You always did talk big, but this time I'm not afraid of you. Not your threats, not your lawyers. He stepped closer, voice low. You think because you gave a sandwich to some drunk in a park, you're entitled to something? That garage was dead the moment George died. Let it stay that way. I met his gaze. That's not your decision anymore. Without waiting for more, I turned and walked out. The receptionist looked up as I passed, her eyes narrowing. I didn't stop. Outside, the sky was bright and cold. I took a deep breath and felt the tension leave me just a little. Calvin had confirmed everything without realizing it. He was scared. He had known something was down there, something Dad kept from him. And now he was scrambling. But this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the truth and making sure it couldn't be hidden again. Not by Calvin, not by fear, not by silence. The next step wasn't one I took lightly. I sat in the car for 15 minutes outside the law firm on Cherry Street, watching people come and go through the glass doors, wondering if she still wore her hair tied back like she used to. I hadn't seen Daisy Monroe in over a decade. Last time we spoke, we were 27 and screaming at each other on a Chicago sidewalk in the middle of a snowstorm. She wanted more time, I wanted more quiet. Neither of us got what we wanted. I finally worked up the nerve and walked in. The receptionist gave me a polite smile and asked who I was here to see. I told her. She asked if I had an appointment. I didn't. I said it was personal. 5 minutes later, Daisy appeared in the hallway, her eyes landing on me with a flicker of surprise that faded into something unreadable. Ethan Caldwell, she said, crossing her arms. Never thought I'd see you walk into a law office voluntarily. I gave a small smile. Life changes people. She nodded once and gestured toward her office. I followed her down the hall past plaques and framed photos of her with smiling clients and city council awards. Daisy had built something solid here. It showed in the way she walked, the way people greeted her. Her office smelled like lavender and old books. She sat behind her desk and waited. I stayed standing. I need your help, I said. She tilted her head. That's vague and bold. It's about my father's estate, about a will that may or may not have ever seen the light of day. She leaned back, curious now. I thought Calvin handled all that. Exactly, and I have reason to believe he might have left out a few things. Important things. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I'd compiled. A copy of the letter my father wrote, photos of the contents of the safe, the financial papers, the note to Walter. I laid them out one by one. Daisy studied them without touching. Her eyes narrowed. Where did you find all this? In a hidden basement compartment at the old garage. Dad left a key with a man named Walter. I only just got it. Calvin never knew. And you think there was a will? I think there was a will. I think Calvin tampered with it. Maybe replaced it. Maybe destroyed part of it. I don't know. But I need someone who can find out. Someone I trust. She was quiet for a long moment, then finally looked up. You came to me. After all this time, why? Because you're good. And because I couldn't lie to you if I tried. That got a smile. Brief but real. All right, let me do some digging. I'll start with probate court records. If there was a filing in 20, I'll find it. I left the office with a strange mix of nerves and relief. Daisy was in. That meant I had someone in my corner who understood the game better than I did. 2 days later, she called. Ethan, come in. I found something. When I got there, she already had the file open on her desk. Your father's estate was processed through standard probate. There is a will on file, but something's off. This document is missing its signature page, and the witness affidavits are vague. No notary, no clear dates. Almost like it was thrown together last minute. Could it be forged? Not exactly. The main body reads like your father, but it's incomplete, which makes it invalid. And more importantly, this version doesn't mention the garage property or any financial assets. It's just vague language about personal belongings going to his next of kin. So Calvin used this to sweep everything under the rug. Seems like it. And unless there's another version or some kind of codicil out there, he got away with it. I pulled out the original letter Dad wrote, showed her the part about not trusting Calvin and leaving me the truth. This proves intent, she said, but not legality. Not unless we find a full will. We sat in silence a moment. Then she spoke softly. Your dad trusted you with this. He didn't leave it in a bank or with an attorney. He left it buried in concrete. That means something. But if we're going to challenge what's on file, we'll need more than just sentiment. So what do? We dig. Literally if we have to. Somewhere out there is the rest of this will. And I have a feeling Calvin's not going to give it up without a fight. Daisy called me just after lunch. Her voice was calm but clipped the way she spoke when she was holding back a storm. She told me to come in now. No explanation. Just now. When I walked into her office, she didn't greet me. She just slid a manila folder across the desk. Found this buried in the county records archive. It was never supposed to be buried there. I had to call in a favor to even get access. I opened the folder. Inside was a scanned copy of a will dated 6 months before Dad died. Not the one Calvin filed. A different one. A full one. Signed. Notarized. Witnessed. And my name was everywhere. My father left me sole ownership of Caldwell Auto. Of the house. Of his personal savings. There were specific instructions on how to manage the assets. Mentions of Aaron by name. A paragraph about Walter and what he meant to Dad. It was unmistakable. And then on the last page, a single stamp. Withdrawal request filed. April 17, 2018, 3 weeks before Dad's death. I looked up at Daisy, who filed the withdrawal guess. He had the authority not officially. But he claimed power of attorney on a document your father signed years prior when he had back surgery. Calvin said your dad wanted to simplify things. The court never verified it. So he used that to pull this will and replaced it with the vague, unsigned draft. Got it through probate because nobody questioned him. You weren't in town. Your dad had no legal rep. Calvin had the story and the access. My hands clenched the folder. Years I spent believing my father didn't trust me, that I'd been written out, and it was all a lie, or worse, it had been stolen. Daisy leaned forward. This is enough. We can file a petition. It won't be quick, but it's solid. Fraud, misrepresentation, document suppression. I'll draft everything. I nodded slowly. Thank you. She looked at me carefully. Are you ready for what comes with this, Ethan? This isn't just paperwork. This will blow up your family. Calvin's not going to roll over. You sure you want to drag Aaron through that? I didn't answer. I drove home in silence. The sun was low by then, casting gold through the windshield as I pulled into the driveway. Erin was on the front porch with a popsicle, swinging her legs and humming to herself. When she saw me, she waved. Hey, Dad, Uncle Cal came by today. My blood went cold. What? She shrugged. Said he just wanted to say hi. Asked if you were okay. Said you were probably stressed out. Then he looked real serious and said Grandpa George never meant to hurt you. Then he left. I sat beside her, heart pounding. What else did he say? Nothing. Just that. Then he said grown-ups do stuff for reasons kids don't understand, and asked if I ever wondered why Grandpa didn't leave you anything. I swallowed hard. What did you say? I asked if it was true, if Grandpa didn't love you. My chest tightened. I looked at her, my daughter, the only thing in the world I had never failed. I couldn't lie. No, honey. Grandpa loved me. He just didn't get a chance to prove it. She looked down. Okay. I was just scared you were mad at him. I kissed the top of her head and held her close. The decision was made in that moment. I couldn't let her grow up thinking love could be stolen. That truth was something you kept quiet about just to keep peace. That night I called Daisy. Let's file. We set the date for a Saturday afternoon. Daisy helped me reserve the back room of a local community center near the east side of town. Neutral ground, bright lighting, enough chairs for everyone and then some. I made the calls myself, one by one, aunts, uncles, cousins. Some hesitated. Most agreed to come out of curiosity. Even Calvin said he'd be there. His voice on the phone was clipped, measured. Don't waste my time, Ethan. I said I wouldn't. I arrived early with Aaron and set up a table at the front. On it I placed the letter from Dad, the full will Daisy had uncovered, notarized, and signed, the stamped withdrawal notice Calvin had filed, and the folder of financial records from the safe. Daisy arrived not long after with a portable scanner and copies for anyone who wanted one. By 3 o'clock the room was full. Folding chairs scraped the tile floor as people settled in. The Caldwell family was not known for frequent reunions. Some faces I hadn't seen in a decade. Others hadn't changed at all. Calvin walked in 10 minutes late wearing a suit and that same sharp smile. He made a show of shaking hands, slapping backs, greeting relatives like a politician on the campaign trail. When he saw me standing by the table, his eyes narrowed. All right, Ethan, you got your audience. What's the play? I waited until everyone was quiet. Thanks for coming. I know this isn't how we usually spend a Saturday, but I've got something to share. Something about Dad, about what he really left behind and who he really was. I began with the letter. Read it aloud, every word. I watched expressions change across the room as my father's voice filled the space again through mine. Some nodded, some frowned. Calvin stood with his arms folded, unmoved. Then I handed out the documents. Daisy stepped forward and explained the legal inconsistencies, the missing pages, the dates. The misuse of a years-old power of attorney to override a legitimate will. "This is all speculation," Calvin said sharply. "You have no proof. Anyone could have written that letter. This supposed will, it was withdrawn probably for a reason. It was withdrawn illegally," Daisy countered. "And the only person who benefited from that withdrawal was you." Someone in the back, Aunt Gloria, spoke up. "Calvin, is it true you claimed George's house and sold it within months of his death?" Calvin turned red. That house was falling apart. "I put the money into the estate." "Which estate?" I asked. "The one you said didn't exist." Murmurs spread through the room. I could feel the shift. Then the doors opened again. Walter walked in slowly, his coat zipped up despite the warm air. He looked around the room, cleared his throat, and stepped forward. "My name is Walter. George Caldwell was my friend. When he passed, he left me a key. Said it wasn't for me. Said it was for Ethan. Said not to give it to him until the time was right. So I waited." He turned to me, then to the crowd. "What Ethan found was real. I saw George put those papers together himself. I was there the day he signed the will. And I know Calvin never liked it." Calvin snapped. "This is absurd. You're taking the word of a homeless man over family." I stepped forward. "No, I'm taking the word of a man who never lied to me, who never took what wasn't his." "Can you say the same, Cal?" Calvin stormed forward, grabbed the folder off the table, and threw it across the room. Papers scattered. "This is a circus. You want to sue me, Ethan? Do it. But don't pretend this is about Dad. This is about you, about your pride, about your failures." I didn't respond. I just looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes I could. You can believe what you want, but this is what happened. My dad didn't leave me nothing. He left me the truth, and it's not just mine anymore. It belongs to all of us who were told otherwise. The room was split. Some stood quietly and left with Calvin. Others stayed behind, asked questions, took copies, talked with Daisy, listened to Walter. The family, like the legacy, was no longer whole, but at least now it wasn't a lie. Filing the petition felt like crossing a bridge that could never be uncrossed. Daisy warned me it wouldn't be quick or clean. Probate challenges rarely were. But the moment she handed in the documents at the Ingham County Courthouse, everything changed. I was no longer just the son of a mechanic. I was the plaintiff in a civil case against my own blood. It took 2 months for the court to schedule the initial hearing. Calvin, through his lawyers, filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the withdrawn will was invalid by my father's own decision. Daisy countered with the withdrawal records, the suspicious timing, the discovery of documents hidden in a personal safe. The judge denied the motion. The trial was set. By the 3rd week, our case made the local news. Headlines read like soap opera scripts. Family fortune dispute shakes Lansing. Caldwell garage at center of inheritance battle. A reporter even showed up at Aaron's school one afternoon, which forced me to issue a statement through Daisy's office asking for privacy. The story had become public property. Inside the courtroom, it felt colder than winter. Calvin sat across the aisle, flanked by attorneys in dark suits. He avoided my eyes most days. Occasionally, he smirked. His legal team was aggressive, attacking Walter's credibility, questioning the chain of custody of the documents, implying I had manufactured the story to what my father supposedly took. Daisy handled it with grace and fire. She presented timelines, handwriting analysis, court filings, and probate inconsistencies. She called on witnesses who had worked with my father, including his old accountant and a notary who remembered the signing. Walter took the stand, and despite their attempts to rattle him, never changed his story. On day 9 of the trial, the judge called a recess after a particularly heated exchange. As I stepped outside, a man approached me with a microphone and a camera crew trailing behind. Mr. Caldwell, is it true you were left out of your father's original will for personal reasons? I looked him in the eye. It's true I was left out of something, but not by my father. The footage aired that night. The comment section online exploded. Some called me brave. Others called me selfish. A few accused me of trying to undo a man's last wishes for the sake of a payout. It got to me, more than I expected, but every time I questioned myself, I remembered Erin's voice. I remembered the hollow look in my mother's eyes the day she told me I'd understand the truth one day. That day was here. By week 3, the pressure began to show on Calvin. His testimony grew erratic. He contradicted his own statements. One day, the judge asked him directly why he had filed for withdrawal of a fully executed will and replaced it with an unsigned draft. He hesitated, then said it was at Dad's request. Do you have written instruction to that effect? No. Any witness who can verify that conversation? No. Any audio or written communication from your father at all stating his intent to change the will? No, he said, looking down. The courtroom fell quiet. Daisy leaned over and whispered, "That was the turning point, but it wasn't the end." The judge requested a week to review all filings, witness transcripts, and supplemental evidence. That week stretched endlessly. I stayed off the internet, spent more time with Erin. Daisy came by one night with Thai food and refused to talk about the case. We watched a bad comedy and pretended to laugh. When the final hearing was announced, my chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. The courtroom was packed that day. Relatives, reporters, strangers. I saw Uncle Roy in the back row, his face unreadable. I took my seat and waited for the verdict. The gavel hit the bench and the judge's voice echoed across the room. He ruled in favor of reinstating the original will. The court acknowledged the withdrawn will as valid and Calvin's actions as interference. The assets were to be returned to the estate under the provisions George Caldwell had laid out. It was over. I didn't feel victorious, just quiet, tired, relieved in a way that made my shoulders sag. Calvin stormed out before the session was dismissed. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. That evening, I drove to the old house one last time. It had been mostly cleared out since the start of the case, but I had left a few boxes untouched in the attic. I wasn't sure why. Maybe part of me couldn't bring myself to finish it while things were still unresolved. The attic smelled like dust and cedar. The heat made everything sticky. I sat down on the old wooden floor and pulled open the last box. It was filled with photo albums, mostly from the early years. Erin as a baby. Me with Dad at the garage. A camping trip I had forgotten. Flipping through the pages, I paused when I saw a small envelope tucked behind a picture of Mom standing in front of the backyard garden. My name was on it, just Ethan. In her handwriting, soft, careful letters. I opened it. My sweet boy. If you're reading this, then life has led you back here. And you found what we all hoped you would. I know your father kept things from you. And I know how much that hurt. But it wasn't because he didn't trust you. It was because he wanted you to grow without weight on your shoulders. He believed, maybe wrongly, that if he gave you space, you'd become strong enough to choose your own path without being bound by his. He also knew that if you were ever truly ready, you would seek the truth. He never intended for Calvin to take what wasn't his. That was never the plan. But pride makes men do foolish things. And your father, like you, had his pride. I didn't interfere because I believed the same thing he did, that someday you would come back not for revenge, but for understanding. And that when you did, you would carry our name with honor, not anger. You've always had a good heart, Ethan. Don't let anyone take that from you. Not even family. Especially not family. Mom. I read the letter twice, then again. I sat in the attic until the sun dropped and the shadows swallowed the edges of the room. There were no more questions now. Just answers I had been too angry to see before. Mom had known. About the will, about the key, about Walter, about Calvin. She hadn't spoken because she wanted me to arrive here on my own terms. For years I had believed silence meant indifference. But maybe it had been faith. I folded the letter and put it in my jacket pocket. As I climbed down the attic ladder, I didn't feel burdened. I felt steadied. Outside, the sky was dark and the house stood still behind me. I looked back at it not with grief but with gratitude. Everything finally made sense. The court's final ruling made headlines again. This time they used words like justice and fraud. The judge declared the initial will invalid due to evidence of interference and upheld the supplemental will that named me sole beneficiary. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were no cheers, just the sound of papers shuffling and Calvin's attorney packing his briefcase, avoiding eye contact. Calvin himself didn't show up for the final session. His lawyer claimed medical issues, but we all knew better. The state opened a separate investigation into potential legal misconduct, forgery, fraud, misrepresentation. It wouldn't be quick, but it would be public, and it would stick. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. I had already lost too much time to bitterness. Later that week, I received a call from Uncle Roy. He asked if we could meet. When I arrived at the diner near Jackson Avenue, he was already sitting at a booth with Aunt Gloria. They stood when I walked in. Roy looked older than I remembered, or maybe just humbled. "We owe you an apology, Ethan, for not asking questions, for not standing up when we should have." I didn't know what to say. Gloria slid a small envelope across the table. "Dad left this with us, too. Said not to give it unless you ever came looking. I think he always knew you would." It was a faded photo of me and Dad at the shop. On the back in his handwriting was one line: "He'll find his way, I believe in him." I held it for a long time before nodding. "Thank you." As I left, I saw Walter standing outside the diner. He had his usual wool coat on, even though the spring air was warming. I walked over and offered him my hand. He shook it firmly. "You kept your promise," I said. He looked me in the eyes. "I made it to your father. I kept it for you." That was enough. I pulled out a check I had already written. A small portion of the estate, enough to start over. "Live somewhere warm. Rest easy." Walter shook his head. "Don't cheapen the gift, son. This wasn't about money. It never was. You needed the truth. Now you have it." I nodded. "Then let me give you this at least, for the road." I handed him my father's old wristwatch, the one he used to wear every day. Walter stared at it, then slowly closed his hand around it. "Tell Erin she's lucky to have you," he said. "I will." He walked away before I could say more. Back home, Erin was working on a school project at the kitchen table. She looked up as I came in, then tilted her head. "You look different." I smiled. "Maybe I feel different." She paused, then asked quietly, "Did Grandpa ever stop loving you?" "No, honey. He just didn't know how to show it right, but he never stopped." She nodded slowly, then returned to her notebook. I sat across from her watching her work. The house felt still, not empty, just full in a different way. Later that night, I stood in the garage, now mostly cleared out. I ran my fingers along the old workbench. The shelves still held a few of Dad's tools, oil-stained rags, half-used cans of paint. I didn't know what I would do with the money yet. But I knew I'd fix up this place, not for profit, not for legacy, just for peace. Because for the first time in a long time, it felt like I could breathe. Like the weight was finally off my chest, and in that quiet I heard Dad's voice again. Not words, just presence. He was gone, but not lost, not anymore. The summer sun hung high the day we reopened the garage. The sign above the front read Caldwell Community Garage, hand-painted by one of the high school kids who'd been helping on weekends. The place looked almost the same from the outside, but inside everything had changed. We cleared out the old oil drums, replaced the cracked concrete, installed clean workbenches and new tool racks. It wasn't just a space to fix cars anymore. It was a place to teach, to rebuild more than engines. Students started showing up a week before the launch, curious. Some came because they wanted to be mechanics. Others just needed something to do that didn't feel like surviving. I saw pieces of myself in each of them, lost but not hopeless, looking for something steady. Erin was at my side the morning of the ribbon cutting. She wore a little denim jacket and held the scissors with both hands like it was a sword. She grinned as the crowd of maybe 30 people clapped and cheered. Walter wasn't there. I didn't expect him to be, but I knew somewhere he'd heard about it. Daisy came too. She stood toward the back, arms folded, smiling. After everything, we had become something better than what we used to be. Not lovers again, not yet anyway, but partners in something honest. After the ribbon fell, I knelt beside Erin and pointed to the steel door in the back of the garage. It was freshly painted red now. That door, I said, used to hide a secret, but now it holds tools for kids like you. Things people need to build their own way forward. She looked at me, eyes bright. Like a new key, right? Exactly. She paused. Did Grandpa know you'd do this? I think he hoped I would. I stood and looked around at the garage, the people, the quiet noise of a place reborn. Sometimes a key doesn't unlock a safe or a door. Sometimes it unlocks trust, forgiveness, love. That's what Dad left me. That's what Walter protected. That's what I'll pass on. To anyone listening, maybe you've been handed a key too. One that doesn't come with instructions or even a lock. But maybe, just maybe, it's the start of something you didn't even know you needed. If you were given a mysterious key, would you be brave enough to open the door? If this story meant something to you, share it with someone you care about. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that matter. Your voice helps us keep telling them.